Tall Tale TV.
Of Monsters and Mushrooms by Leslie Herron. Chapter 11, Agaricus.
Oi! Get off of me, you big lugs!
Evan groaned, shoving Attila's boot away from his face. The vortex had unceremoniously spat them out into the otherworld in an uncomfortable jumble. Attila and Eric were struggling to untangle themselves from one another, and Evan was forced to wrench himself free from beneath them. Like stepping through the fabled looking glass, their trip had been as equally bizarre. Time warped around them, pushing and pulling, and left them suspended mid-step for a whole week. They emerged, feeling drained and dizzy. The sensation could only be described as being repeatedly dropped into a pool of ice-cold water and then dunked into a vat of molten lava. It froze and seared them at the same time, leaving them drenched in sweat and shivering. When Grandma Sadie had come to him and offered Evan a once-in-a-lifetime contract, he thought it would be the huge adventure, and not to mention payday, he had been waiting for. But as he climbed to his feet and gazed around him, he couldn't be sure of what he had been thinking when he'd stepped through that swirling gate. Eric's description of the otherworld didn't even begin to do it justice. He had recalled the area as a desolate desert and darkness. But the truth of it was, this place was a wasteland. The ground shifted between endless rolling dunes of white sand urged on by the wind, and vast expanses of dry and cracked hard ground with massive splits and fissures. As for the darkness, the word just wasn't strong enough for the black aura that surrounded them. It was like an eerie twilight haze that seemed to sap any color that may have existed here to begin with.
I'm not taking any chances!
Attila shouted, folding his arms in a fixed stance.
Look, you can trust me. It's safe. These mushrooms are small and harmless. Any spore that you may ingest will be killed off by your immune system.
Eric demonstrated this by taking in a deep breath.
Hey, stow it, you two!
Evan snapped, marching up to his colleagues. With Vel's departure, this meant they were down their best fighter, and the only one with any real common sense. Evan had run through their options and grudgingly decided he was going to be their new leader.
All right, you can leave your mask on. Just remember, the mushrooms are hallucinogenic, and here, since they are so small, they're super concentrated. If you eat one, you'll be hallucinating for weeks,
Eric warned, tucking his mask into his coat. Evan followed Eric's example and stowed his mask, eyeing the tiny mushrooms that grew around the base of the occasional boulder.
Eric, you've been here before, so, where do you figure we should start looking for this brig fella?
He asked, looking around. They had been dropped into a sort of solid island in the middle of the ocean of sand. There was no way for them to discern directions, as there was no sun or mountain ranges. There was nothing, just darkness closing in around them. Eric lifted his hand and pointed off into the distance.
That's probably where the unseen creature dragged Attila's friend.
There, nestled in the black of the horizon, was a dark, swirling cloud. It danced and swayed on a non-existent wind, as if it were alive. Squinting hard, Evan could see that the cloud seemed to be moving around what might have been the silhouette of a city. He shot Eric a glance.
I thought you said there weren't any people over here, just bugs and blob thingies.
The unseen, yes.
Eric pointed at the cityscape.
Those aren't buildings. Those are hives, home to most of the nastier species that live here.
All right then, let's go,
Attila replied, taking a giant step in the direction of the mounds. Finally, a path directly to his friend.
Hang on,
Eric said as he grabbed Attila by the poncho.
We need a plan first. We can't just go charging off into the heart of unseen territory.
Something skittering around a nearby rock caught Evan's attention. It didn't seem to notice them, yet. It was busy chasing a beetle the size of a deck of cards. The insect scurried into a hole beneath a rock, and the black creature buried its muzzle deep into the dirt in pursuit. It had the overall shape of a small dog, but it had 6 legs and 2 tails. And where the other unseen seemed to be composed of goo animating a skeleton, this creature had mangy black fur that was soaked with black ooze.
So, what's the plan then? Wait for Brig to get eaten, then check the mounds of monster poo? Come on, we've wasted enough time.
Attila pointed out, huffing indignantly. He could feel that brief moment of happiness begin to slip away.
The last time I was here, my brother and I got stuck here for quite some time. We managed to find an old abandoned dirt mound and fashioned it into a home of sorts. It should still be there. We had maps of the area and a fair amount of rudimentary weapons, both of which we'll need to navigate this place.
Eric put a consoling hand on Attila's shoulder, hoping this action would do for an apology. Evan watched as the unseen pulled its goo-stained snout away from the rock. It pointed its face into the air and began sniffing. Slowly, it turned its head in their direction and glared at them through 4 glowing red eyes. The unseen began pacing, as if it were determining what to do with them. It would scurry forward a step or 2, growl at him, and then dart back to the safety of its digging hole. Evan gave a snort as he bent down and picked up a sizable rock. He took a brief moment to aim, and then lobbed the stone at the creature. 10 points, Evan thought, as he watched the rock connect with the unseen's deformed rump. At the sound of an unmistakable animal yelp, Eric turned to see the small creature scampering away, both of its tails tucked between its legs.
Hey, knock it off,
he snapped, turning to Evan.
You don't need to worry about the small ones.
It was looking at me all funny-like,
Evan replied, folding his arms over his chest.
I'd throw a rock at you if you looked at me like that.
There was something in the way that Evan delivered that warning.
Fair point.
Eric made a face, making a note to keep his gaze elsewhere from now on.
Well, let's get going before any of the other creatures notice us. It's not just the unseen we have to worry about here.
There were no structures around to use, nothing to help them avoid detection. Their only hope of making it to the hovel unscathed was to march across the open expanse of land as quickly as they could. The shifting sand dunes made their journey almost impossible. Like the turbulent waves of the ocean, the sand rolled and swayed, shifting out from underneath them and tossing them backwards, or else dropping them suddenly onto hard ground as they walked. At first glance, the other world seemed strangely empty. Where were all these monsters that they had been so expressly warned about? The more they walked, however, the more creatures became apparent to them. The bugs were great at blending into their surroundings, and more than once, a small group of bugs would flutter up out of the sand, eager to flee from the approaching footsteps. Occasionally, a larger bug, sometimes the size of a throw pillow, would fly past, its vibrating wings sounding like a badly tuned lawnmower. And everywhere they went, Evan could see small, inky shadows darting behind rocks or disappearing behind sand dunes. They chittered and clicked at him angrily, but never approached. It was almost unnerving to have their journey dogged by wary unseen.
I thought those things were supposed to be invisible,
Attila asked, clambering up a staggering peak just behind Eric.
Well, I think it might have something to do with the light spectrum in this place. It must react differently with their anatomy.
Eric began, turning to offer Attila a hand up.
Because the atmosphere is completely different in our realm.
So, what you saying,
Evan started, tapping his chin thoughtfully,
is that these things are fish?
Eric turned to look at Evan.
What? No. How? I didn't say anything about fish,
he said, flabbergasted. Attila nodded sagely.
Ah, I get it. So, like, we're the fish.
Enough with the fish,
Eric shot, his confusion fading into anger. He felt a twinge of pain in his temple, and he finally began to understand exactly how his brother must have felt.
For geniuses, you two should talk a lot of nonsense,
Evan said, clambering up a rock to get a better view.
As long as I can stab it, squash it, or bash it over the head, I don't care what the light does to it.
The rock shifted in the sand and rose a couple of inches off the ground to reveal several hard-shelled legs beneath it. It clacked a pair of pincers and shook itself, sending Evan toppling off. It scuttled away in a huff, looking for a more peaceful place to nap. Evan hauled himself to his feet.
What the heck was that?
The last time I was here, there were all sorts of bug creatures. They ranged from these small cicada-like things to towering armored guardian bugs, about 15 feet tall. Heck, even the borer worms came from this place. The insects sort of cohabitate with the unseen, except I haven't had the chance to gather any real data, so that's just my observation. Mainly because of all the...
Eric gave a profound shudder.
All the legs freak me out.
Don't be a baby. If we run into any more bugs, I'll just squash them for yous.
Evan pointed out, slipping on the shifting sands. Eric didn't get a chance to respond, as the dune they were traversing collapsed, sending them cascading through the powder-fine dust, like a group of kids sledding down a snow-covered hill, only dirtier, and left them with sand in some very uncomfortable places. As they got to their feet, Evan heard a furious chattering. Descending down upon them from the next dune over was the same unseen that he had scared off earlier. And like a child that had been hit by the schoolyard bully, it had returned with two of its larger companions. Two hulking, bear-sized unseen lumbered just behind the smaller one.
Oh, crap.
Eric started to scramble backwards, trying to get back onto the sand dune.
Don't panic, guys. How tough can they be? We took out a whole building full of these things.
Evan's fingers flexed nervously over his sheathed knives.
Yeah, by dropping the building on them,
Eric retorted. Attila reached over and bonked Evan on the head with his fist.
Nice going, short stuff.
The roar of the larger unseen drowned out Evan's response. He swore under his breath and made a mental note to shove Attila down a sand dune the next chance he got. If he got another chance. He drew his daggers and spun them reflexively in his grip.
Hang on, I got this,
Attila piped up. He stood and moved to the front of the group.
Sometimes all you need is diplomacy.
What?
Eric blurted out, panic written in his features.
They're giant ooze monsters. They don't speak.
Chitter, chitter, click, chitter, click, click,
Attila said jovially.
What in the name of all that is holy are you doing?
Eric snapped in a whisper.
I'm communicating with them. It's all in the tone,
Attila replied matter-of-factly as he turned his attention back to the unseen. Unfortunately, they didn't seem to take kindly to his first sentence. Attila ground down on his resolve, putting his hands in the air, and began to advance on them slowly. He gave them his most rakish smile, which didn't do much of anything as he was still wearing his mask. Eric tried to grab a hold of the merc's poncho, but it fluttered out of his fingertips' reach as Attila marched forward.
Chitter, chit, chit, chitter, chatter, click, click.
Attila made pinching motions with his hands in what he hoped was a peaceful gesture.
We're all gonna die, aren't we?
Evan asked Eric, who was dragging a hand down his face.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure we are.
The unseen stopped advancing, looking at Attila in confusion. One of them chittered a query at him.
Click, clack, chitter, chitter, snap.
Attila gestured over to Evan, then gave a huge shrug.
Clack, clack, chitter,
he said in what he hoped was an apologetic way.
Did he just throw me under the bus?
Evan asked. The largest unseen gave a grunt and appeared to be almost convinced of leaving, shifting its weight as if to turn on its heels. But the smaller one narrowed its four eyes at Evan and started yipping angrily at him. baring bone-yellow teeth in a hateful grin. To which Evan replied with a rude gesture. The grizzly-sized goo monsters each gave a visible sigh of inconvenience before they began to carry out the orders of their smaller companion. Either way, the bulkier of the two bear-like creatures lunged for Attila.
Chitter, chitter, ee!
Attila cried out as he tucked himself into a ball. A completely different roar rent the air around them, causing the large unseen to stop mid-attack. A boulder, larger than one of the creatures, flew through the air with the grace of, well, a flying rock. It teetered and spun on its axis and did a pirouette before it slammed into the ground, exploding one of the larger unseen beneath its weight. Through a thick veil of tar-like goo, Eric could see the other two unseen attempting to scurry away. He spat out a mouthful of the sludge and looked in the direction the rock had come from. A giant armored bug stood atop an insurmountable sand peak.
Oh no. Oh great. What now?
Evan asked as he tried to scoop the sticky mess out of his own eyes. Eric pointed at the bug, who was standing on two stocky legs, wielding a rudimentary sword made from another giant bug's mandible.
It's an armored guardian.
The humanoid insect leapt from the dune, its arms waving furiously in front of it. The smaller unseen scampered away as the bug sliced into the large one, like a chef dicing up an onion.
This isn't good,
Eric said, taking a sticky step back. Attila backpedaled until he was level with Eric.
I bet you're wishing you still had your mask on,
he said haughtily, pointing to his ooze-free mask.
We need to move, now,
Eric replied, choosing to ignore his friend's snide remark.
What's the problem? We should be thanking that big bug,
Evan pointed out, peering around Eric's legs. He jabbed Attila in the back of his calf.
Go on, get to thanking it.
It's a giant bug person thing. How the heck am I supposed to do that?
It's all in the tone,
Evan replied mockingly.
Oh, right.
Wait, stop,
Eric began, but his pleas fell on deaf ears. Attila marched up to the bug.
Chitter, chitter, click, click, chitter.
The giant bug whirled around to glare down at Attila. Curiously, the creature was almost as wide as it was tall, standing but a foot higher than Attila, with its bulging muscles hidden between a layer of thick, battle-scarred chitin armor. Where its carapace had been broken, there were plates scavenged from fallen foes lashed to its body. It slowly reached into a makeshift chitin basket and removed a handful of mushrooms, then shoved them into what Attila could only assume was the creature's mouth.
Chitter?
Attila asked. It was observing the three of them as it chowed down on its mouthful of spongy morels, trying to determine what they were. They looked like unseen, dripping black goo everywhere, but they were so scrawny and small, they posed no threat. It pondered the closest one's request and relented. The bug shoved its hand back into its mushroom basket and pulled it free. It offered a fistful of fungi to Attila, like it was extending an olive branch. Attila didn't get a chance to recoil. The bug and its loose concept of personal space was busy shoving the handful of mushrooms into his mask. It couldn't seem to understand why this creature was not accepting its peaceful offering, as it continued to push them against its face.
Spores!
Attila cried out, smacking the bug's hand away and knocking the fungi to the ground. The creature looked surprised for a fraction of a moment, and then threw back its head and roared, "Banana!" Attila looked over his shoulder.
Did the bug just say banana?
Before the others had a chance to respond, or even to warn him, Attila felt a heavily armored foot connect with his middle, and he collapsed backwards, end over end. He tried to blink away the stars and regain his breath, his hands clutching his stomach.
Oh, banana, bad.
He gasped.
Run,
Eric ordered, already sprinting in the opposite direction.
Hey, I'm in charge, and we ain't backing down from a fight.
Evan bounded into action, his tiny daggers flashing dangerously as he jumped on the massive bug. He struck out with the blades, but his armor proved to be too thick, each blow glancing off its thick hide. Cursing under his breath and choosing to ignore Evan's self-appointed leadership, Eric ran over to grab Attila. Just once, he'd like one of his plans to go off without a hitch. He hauled the merc to his feet, spun him to face the bug, and shook him by the shoulder.
Do something!
Attila, still winded, wheezed again and pulled out a small micro-torch from the depths of his poncho.
Let's light this bug up.
The giant bug grunted in frustration as it tried to grab the tiny flea scampering around its shell. Evan stifled a giggle as he continued to annoy the bug. With its thick armor, its range of motion was restricted, and it couldn't quite reach him. Nor was it very fast. Evan would have even chanced a guess at saying that it wasn't that smart either. He would scurry from its shoulder, stabbing furiously at the bug there, and then clamber down to its hip for another attempt. But it was all in vain. Evan simply could not find a weak spot in the armor. It was too thick, and his daggers too small. He ran up the bug's back to try at the neck. The bug gave up trying to dislodge Evan, tossed its mandible sword down, and threw itself into the ground. If it couldn't catch the tiny creature, then crushing him would have to suffice. It clambered to its feet, turning to the crater it just made, expecting to see a black smear in the dirt. It cursed,
Expectorant lightstick!
as it felt a knife glance off the top of its head.
Oi, stop it, you dumb bug! Stand still so I can kill yous.
Evan shouted as he scuttled around the monster's massive back, trying to find its weak spot. The bug responded by tossing itself into a large boulder, growling angrily.
A little help here?
Evan cried out, hanging onto the bug's giant foot as it threw itself into the ground again. A feeble cry rent the air, and Evan turned to see Attila, charging at them with what looked like an old pocket lighter. Attila, emboldened by his weapon of choice, clicked the micro-torch on. His hand, still covered in black tar, caught fire.
Oh, right. I forgot that unseen goo is flammable.
Eric said aloud, but mostly to himself. Attila realized his arm was starting to get a bit warm and looked down.
Holy crackers!
He swatted at the flames with his other hand, which also caught fire. He let out a cry of anguish as he tried and failed to slap out the fire against his thigh.
Ah!
Eric rushed over and grabbed Attila by the poncho and tried to rip the fabric off him, but it caught around his mask, and Eric succeeded only in wrapping up Attila's head, which promptly caught fire as the merc tried to pull it off. If he didn't act quickly, his friend was sure to be a smoldering pile of ash soon. Eric pushed him down into the dirt and began shoveling sand onto him like a dog burying a bone. Distracted by the flailing fireball, the bug stopped paying attention to the tiny pest. It was just long enough for Evan to get a good look at the creature's front, and he finally found it. There, just beneath the chin, where the neck met the head, was a gap just large enough for a blade to enter. He aimed his dagger carefully and went in for the kill. A dinner plate-sized hand plucked him from the air with surprising speed, clutched around his middle like a vice. The bug snatched the dagger out of his hand and crumpled it into a tiny ball of twisted steel. It let loose a mighty shout,
Clavicle Snapfist!
as it shook Evan in an attempt to frighten him. A rock bounced off the bug's head just below the eye socket, and it turned to face its assailant.
Hey, don't shake babies,
Eric ordered before he chucked another stone at the monster.
You son of a...
Evan started, but his words were lost as the bug swung him around and pitched him like a baseball at Eric. As they collided, The momentum from the toss sent them both sprawling into the sand dune. The bug, finally having had enough, marched towards the smoldering remains of Attila. It drew a long, jagged-edged blade from a sheath at its back. Attila had managed to untangle the poncho from around his face and mask, just in time to see a glint of an iridescent blade flying through the air. This is it, he thought. This is how I die. And again, no busty babes. He clenched his eyes shut and let out a petulant huff. There was a loud crack, and Attila cried out, sure he was now dead. He gave a dramatic gurgle. His head lolled to the side, and he was ready for eternity to have its last laugh.
Get up, you moron!
Attila peeked an eye open. A familiar ruffle of red flooded his vision. Vel was standing over him, his mechanical hand clenched tight around the blade. Of Monsters and Mushrooms, an ongoing series by Leslie Herron, is a crossover fanfiction mixing her own characters and settings with a few of those created by author J.D. Wiley. She writes for the fun of devising new ways of messing with her characters and seeing just how much trouble they can get into.
I told you guys, I don't wanna. Come on, man. It's easy. No, let the whack job do it. Yeah, let me do it. No, you do it way too often. It's Evan's turn. Well, I ain't doing it. Guys? Please? I don't think I can stand another Attila outro. If you— Hey, guys! What? The little red light is on. Does that mean this thing is recording? Aw, crap. Quick, just get over there and say something. Fine, but you're carrying all my gear for a week. Deal. Right. If you liked the story, subscribe. If you didn't like the story, subscribe anyway, or I'll rearrange your face. I don't think we're allowed to threaten the view. Do you want me to do this or not? Sorry. I'm Evan, and that's it for today's Tall Tale TV.